So time to pass the incoming request and get the data that is part of the request, because that data should be whatever we entered here. Now how do we get access to that? Well, we get a request URL, a request method. You might think there's something like a request data, but there isn't. Instead, the incoming data is basically sent as a stream of data. That is a special construct JavaScript engineer knows, but Node.js uses a lot. Now what is such a stream of data? There's a connected concept, buffers, and we'll have a look at both here. So let's take our incoming request as an example. There are also our streams, like for example, when we work with the files, we can also work with the streams, but let's stick to request here. Our stream here is basically an ongoing process. The request is simply read by node and chunks, you could say, and multiple parts. And at the end, at some point of time, it's done. And this is done so that we are theoretically can start working on it on the individual chunks without having to wait for the full request to be read. Now for a simple request like the one we are working with, this is not really required. We only got one input field data. It doesn't take so long to pass that, but consider a file being uploaded. This will take considerably longer, and therefore streaming that data could make sense, because it could allow you to start writing this to your disk, so to your hard drive where your apps run, your node apps run on your server whilst the data is coming in, so that you don't have to pass the entire file, which is of course takes some time, and you have to wait for it be fully unloaded before you can do anything with it. But this is how Node handles all requests, because it does not know in advance how complex and big they are. You can start working on the data earlier. The problem is with your code, you can arbitrarily try to work with these chunks. Instead, to organize these incoming chunks, you use a so-called buffer. Buffer is like a bus stop. If you consider buses, they are always drive, but for users or customer be able to work with them to climb on the bus and leave the bus, you need bus stops where you can track the bus basically, and that is what a buffer is. Buffer is simply a construct which allows you to hold multiple chunks and work with them before they are released once you are done, and you work with that buffer. Now that's pretty abstract, but it's pretty easy to work with, fortunately. So let's see how that works in practice. When receiving a posted message, before sending the response, before writing to the file, we want to get our request data, and we do this by going to our request and registering an event listener. We have done that thus far, but Node uses this heavily. For create server, it implicitly creates one for us. Now we do this on our own by using the on method. The ons allow us to listen to the certain events. The event I want to listen to here is the data event. You see, my IDE even gives me some help here. Tells me which events I want to listen to for a request. So here I want to listen for the data event. The data event will be fired whenever a new chunk is ready to be read. You remember that buffer thing? This is basically helping us with that. Now here we have to add a second argument, which is that function that should be executed for every data event. You remember create server? It has a similar concept. There we defined a function that should be executed for every incoming request. Now we are defining a function to be executed for every incoming data piece. So here, I'm again using an ES6 arrow function. You could also use the function keyword without that arrow. As you can also see on data, this listener receives a chunk of data. So here, we receive a chunk. And this chunk is something we can work with here. And now we have to do something with this chunk to be able to interact with it. For this, I will create a new constant, and I will name it body, because I will try to read the request body. You can name it however you want, but it is a request body we are working with. Now the body should be an empty array. And now in that function here, in the data event, I will take my body and push a new element onto it. By the way, you are wondering how we can add a constant value. This only means that we can never reassign a new value, so we can never use body equals something again. But with the push, we are changing the object behind that body element, that body object. We are editing that data and that object, not the value itself, not the object itself. It's a bit strange to wrap your head around, but this is in the end how it works. So we can now push a new element into this array to make it not empty, and we push our chunk here. Now Node.js will execute this so often until it's done, getting all the data out of our request. That can be once, that can be multiple times. And we can even log this to see how often it does this and what's inside of this chunk. Now we need to register another event listener. That is the end listener. This will be fired when it's done parsing the incoming request data or the incoming request in general. Here it will again execute a function we define as a second argument. And in this function, we can now rely on all the chunks being written and they are all stored in the body now. Now to enter with that, to work with all these chunks, we now need to buffer them. Remember the bus stop concept? We get all these chunks, so we now need to do is something to be able to work with them to basically have one place where the bus stops and we can enter with it. So here I will now create a new constant, parse body, and then I will use the buffer object, which is available globally, made available by Node.js, and I can concat my body. So this will in the end create a new buffer and add all the chunks from inside my body to it. And then on this buffer which I got here, parsed body is now a buffer. There I can go to string to convert it to a string. So this is a utility method offered by Node.js where we do something to our buffer chunks. Remember, the bus is now ready in the bus stop, so to say, the buffer is our bus stop. And now we do something with it. Here we can convert it to a string, and this only works because I know that the incoming data will be text, because the body of that request will be text. If it were a fine, we will have to do something different, but it's a no fine, and I know that it isn't because we're writing the code. We know what we received, so this is this parsed body. And this is now finally what we can work with. So let's also output the parsed body here. So let's simply have a look with the server, Ctrl C and restart it. And then send another request with the sub message here. And now if you have a look at what's being logged, you see two elements. The first one is coming from this console log. And you see this is a chunk. This is a chunk we can work with. And now the pass body received or yields this line. And that is something we can work with. It's a message equals something because we named our output here message. And as I said, that phone will automatically send a request where it takes all the output data and puts it into the request body as key value pairs where the names are assigned to inputs are the keys and the values are what the user entered. And that is what we have here, a key value pair separating the key from the value with an equal sign. And now with that we can work with that and finally store the input in our file. And we can do that here and request or end by creating new constant message, taking the parsed body and spreading it on the equal sign, and then taking the element with index 1, which is the second element in the resulting array, which is the element on the right of the equal sign. And now we can move the reference sync into the end function. We don't want to execute it here because this is where it actually run before this function call. Because here, we just register to be called in the future. It is not executed immediately. Remember, Node does not wait and pause. It will not block the script execution. It's just register this as a to be executed action, and the right way continues. So if we have something that depends on the incoming data, we have to move it into the event listener too, so that it also part of the to be executed code sometime in the future, and it does not run early. And now we can write a message to the message text file. Message. So let's now restart this file one more time and enter hello here and send. And now if you look into the message text, we see hello. This works just fine. And if you are now totally frightened by how complex Node.js is, this is the raw logic. We will later use the Express.js which hides all that raw logic. But to understand why we use that, we first of all need to understand what's happening. And why using tools like the Express.js which will make all of this much easier or great. So with that we got our basic logic down.